true, independent, transparent, and thorough investigation into the matter. I believe that such an investigation will do one of two things. It'll either show us conclusively that 9/11 indeed is not what we were told, or it'll squash the conspiracy theories. We have petitions up here from the 9/11 Truth Action Project, which is demanding a new investigation of Congress. Please sign the petition if you want to see a resolution to this debate. One of the lawyers working on the 9/11 Truth Action Project is Daniel Sheehan. He worked on the Pentagon Papers. So there's a large body of educated people in this movement. We have pilots for 9/11 Truth, scientists for 9/11 Truth, scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice, and of course, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Tonight we're going to hear from Richard Gage, an architect of 28 years, CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I'm going to turn it over to Richard in just a second. I just want to say thank you to Richard for his time. I want to thank the Book Cafe, ETG, for putting the event on. I want to thank Andy Steele and Samantha Penn for connecting me with Richard Gage. And one last thought before I turn it over to Richard. Do we have any professionals in the relevant fields here tonight? Architects, engineers, physicists, chemists? Okay, good. If we do, I hope you'll watch the presentation, and there will be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end. So get your questions ready. And the event is being streamed live on YouTube. Richard?
Hi, guys. Great to be here in Staten Island. I've never visited the island. I intend to now that a good group there. Mike, we'll need you to go on mute.
Okay, yeah.
And thanks so much. It's just a delight to be here with you. We've been at it for 10 years now with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. We have been educating professionals, the academic sphere, the media, the public in general. We have many projects ongoing, which we'll tell you more about. But what I want to do is dive right in to the material. So I'll share my screen with you, and we will march forward. As Mike mentioned, we have 2,800 now architects and engineers calling for a new investigation. You're going to find out why today. These are professionals who have nothing to gain, who are risking their reputations, in fact, by digging back into the past, finding something very worthwhile to bring to your attention and the attention of our leadership, our government, media, etc. You know, it starts with World Trade Center Building 7. Which is why in 2010 we erected a third light beam into the sky. And this was an extraordinary event. And it got some media attention in the city, and people were going, whoa, what is that third light beam in the sky? We did it with a pickup truck loaded with 4 major searchlights, pointing straight up just down the street there. Anyway, what we're talking about is a third tower that came down on 9/11. I mean, here's a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in most of our states, but seems dwarfed compared to the tallest buildings in the world at the time they were built, the World Trade Center skyscrapers. So this is a huge building. Each floor of this building is the size of a football field. You can't quite appreciate it from these drawings. It is part of the World Trade Center complex. But this building was not hit by an airplane. And yet, in the afternoon of 9/11, it did collapse. You know, it's about a football field in length away from the Twin Towers. And you can see it here, surviving the collapse of the Twin Towers. It had some minor damage, but NIST the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked with explaining this building collapse to the American people, said it came down by normal office fires and that the damage to the building was an insignificant factor in its collapse. So let's look at the building collapse for the first time for many of us. Mike, would you ask the audience how many are relatively unfamiliar with this third tower? And then I'll need some feedback from you, so you'll have to come off of mute.
Actually, only a couple of hands, Richard. Seems like most
Okay,
people.
and Mike, that's typical. And before you go away, how many in the audience do we have today?
About 20, Richard.
Awesome. Great crowd. Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks everybody. So here's this building. Watch it collapse on the afternoon of 9/11. The East Penthouse collapses first. 6 seconds later, the whole building comes down. So you can begin to guess why we have so much controversy here. Now, we'll go into more detail on this. But NIST claims that these fires, which are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of going on in this building, these fires, normal office fires, are the cause of this building's collapse. And so we're going to be looking at that quite carefully. NIST says they were concentrated, those fires, in and around this column 79, which failed first. And they focus in on that because to try to explain how the East Penthouse up above failed 6 seconds prior to the overall building collapse. Let's take a look. We've got fires certainly engaged on the floor 12, which is where NIST begins its effort to diagnose the initiation of collapse. And those fires were raging, they say, around column 79 from 4 to 5:20, the hour and a half prior to this building's collapse. However, what we note is that those fires indeed, according to the photos and videos, are out on that floor. And in that entire corner of the building. So they could not have been engaged in thermal expansion, the official theory from NIST for the cause of this building's collapse. We'll look at that. These fires are on the 5th or 6th floor. They're not part of the initiation of collapse. So what are we talking about? We're talking more likely that those fires on the left side of the left column, we have done our own fire simulation. They show they were around column 79, certainly, but there's only enough fire in a building to provide there's only enough fuel to provide a fire 20 minutes or so of burning time, and it moves on. So that's what we show, indeed. And that's what the videos and the photographs reveal also. So NIST is not being square with the architects and engineers who are pursuing the truth here. And that's just the beginning of the fraudulence on the part of NIST, as is this theory where they suggest that these long span beams traveling left to right have pushed this girder off of its seat on this column 79 by thermal expansion. So this girder sliding laterally off of its seat on this column, as you can see in the blow up here, and that causes 13 to fall on floor 12, 12 on 11, etc. for 9 floors. And then this column 79 begins to buckle because it's not braced anymore. And that causes the interior collapse of this building. Well, none of that could be true for a dozen reasons, which we go into detail in our analysis with the architects, which this course is a distillation of. We present the architects, the 3-part series, 9/11, an architect's guide, Part 1 is Building 7. Part 2 is the explosive nature of the Twin Towers. Part 3 is the incendiary destruction of the Twin Towers, extreme heat. So altogether, those comprise 3 courses, which we are now approved by the American Institute of Architects to provide to its members, which is fantastic because we've had almost 100 people, architects, take the course now. And we're going to be doing a lot of marketing to increase that number geometrically in the near future. But number 1, the fires were out. These beams couldn't have been expanding, causing the pushing off of this girder off of its seat. Number 2, there's shear studs or pins tying these beams and this girder up to this floor slab according to the construction shop drawings. So these beams aren't going to be pushing this girder anyway because they're fireproofed. With 2 and 3 hour fire protection, we have not enough heat in the 20 minutes that a fire can burn in a given area to develop into enough expansion. So it couldn't happen. And this girder couldn't have slid off of its seat since it's tied into the floor slab up above. But even if all that could have happened, this girder would have had to have been pushed all 12 inches of the beam seat length in order to fall off. But NIST says, oh no, it didn't have to do that. All it had to do was push half of it, because then this flange, this lower flange of this girder would have folded. And then, but in order to make that argument, they suggest that these stiffeners weren't there. Or weren't necessary, or would not have kept the flange from folding. But it's very obvious to any structural engineer that this is a key element that nullifies NIST's theory of the flange folding. So there's not enough thermal expansion to push the girder all the way off of its seat. So in fact, there's not even enough to push it 5 inches off of its seat. So even if all that could have happened, floor 13 couldn't have fallen on 12 because there's 2 other major girders tying into this column. That's extraordinary. It would have kept that floor intact even if this girder could have fallen off of its seat. So, and even if those girders failed, you might have had in a local failure, this floor falling around column 79, but it could not have provided enough force to break the girder connections below, because the girders are framed the same way in the floor below. So and even if that could happen, you wouldn't have had the entire interior of this building collapsing in on itself without a major deformation of the exterior structural steel system, breaking of granite panels and windows. It would have been very obvious, but that's not what we saw. And it's not what you'll see when you watch this building collapse again. So here it is here, along with, on the right, NIST's computer animation seeking to prove their theory that this building fell by collapsed due to normal office fires. And it does just the opposite. First of all, it looks nothing like the actual collapse, which begins suddenly, which drops smoothly straight down through 40,000 tons of structural steel. And the model on the right shows a massive dismemberment of the interior structural steel system at 400 structural steel connections failing every second, a completely unnatural event. But they can do it in their computer models. But even though they can do that, they cannot get this computer model to collapse similarly to the actual building that we see. In fact, they stop 2 seconds into its collapse and will not show us what happens. Why? Well, it begins to tip over, which is what any kind of natural organic collapse based on natural causes would have done, with a massive deformation in its exterior structure, which it shows in the computer model, but none of which is shown in the actual video of the collapse. So now you know why we have hundreds of architects and engineers calling for a new investigation. So we use the scientific method in our efforts to get to the truth, winnow fact from fiction, error from truth. We have a question. How did the tower come down? Well, we do some background research, make some observations, construct a hypothesis. This is our best guess as to how towers come down. We make some predictions, test them with experiments, analyze the results, and draw conclusions. If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner. And this is exactly what NIST did not do, because we asked them, please provide us. This is in writing in a Freedom of Information Act request, which our government allows us to do of itself, part of our democracy in action. But they refused to release the computer input data to the architects and engineers, citing it might jeopardize public safety. Wait a minute. We're the architects and engineers that are tasked with ensuring the public safety. Don't you think we should have all the information available to us so that we can check your work? But that wasn't done. So transparency is a real problem with NIST as well. Hypothesis, if it's not corroborated, we report the results. We go back and we find another hypothesis that stands a better chance against the evidence, the experimental data. So let's apply the scientific method. Looking at the forces that do destroy buildings. Fire is certainly a force that destroys buildings. Like wood buildings, never has a high-rise collapsed before 9/11 or since by fire. So why? Well, fire is an organic process. It moves through the building every 20 minutes or so, as we mentioned. So say in a wood frame building, a collapse would occur in stages. It would fall over to the path of least resistance, not straight down to the path of greatest resistance. In the case of a skyscraper, the thousands of tons of structural steel material in the building. Let's look at steel buildings, because there have been incredible tests done. They built an 8-story steel building, both fireproofed and non-fireproofed, inside to see what would happen if they set this thing on fire with 2,000-degree fires. Look. And then we'll see what happened. And it's produced it was done in 1995 in the United Kingdom.
The way in which steel-framed buildings behave in fires depends on their construction. In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags and can no longer support the load.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
Until recently. Of course, we're referring here to 9/11, where we had not just 2, but 3 high-rise fires. High-rise buildings come down ostensibly due to fire, and of course with the Twin Towers jet plane impacts as well. So they just had bending of the beams. The steel can soften at about half. It loses half its strength at about 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have steel frame buildings that have had fires over 100, much hotter, larger, longer lasting fires in these buildings. Mike, I want to make sure that you're on mute, and because I'm getting some clicking. Also, want to make sure that,
We're on mute, Richard. We're on mute, Richard.
Okay.
Two.
Thanks so much. We have 22 viewers online live with us. You'll have better resolution, you guys, if you go to the gearbox on your YouTube screen and increase your resolution to 720 HD. Sometimes that can be very helpful. Not even in Los Angeles, 3.5 hours burning over 5 floors do we have a collapse. Or in Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. No collapse. This is unprecedented. The 44-story Mandarin Hotel, did it collapse? Well, it's burning from ground to roof. Complete conflagration in 2009 in Beijing. Did this building come down? Well, before on the left, after on the right, slightly toasted around the edges. No collapse. Doesn't happen. But these buildings collapsed, not due to fire, but in this case due to earthquakes, a natural collapse. Well, we have the building certainly broken up, mangled at the bottom. Recognizable, though, as a building. Its structural members are not completely severed from each other. Its concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder, like we see with Building 7, for instance. Well, these buildings exploded. There's thick, billowing, enormous pyroclastic-like clouds, cauliflower-shaped, expanding rapidly due to the intense chemical reactions. A thick, defined edge around the outside. We have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. If you have these features, you know you have explosions. Now, explosions are not a part of the official story of 9/11. Well, let's see how explosions can be harnessed to do lots of damage, but in a controlled fashion to bring a building smoothly, efficiently, straight down, often into its own footprint, because thousands of precisely placed and timed cutter charges go off floor by floor. It's a science that only a handful of companies in the United States are capable of performing. And fire, of course, never has. Well, with these features, typical features in controlled demolition, we have a sudden onset of the destruction at the base of the structure, a straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint, because demolition waves remove those column supports, resulting in a free fall acceleration straight down through the path of what was the greatest resistance, the thousands of tons of structural steel designed to resist a collapse. Number 5, a total dismemberment of the steel structure that is broken up, ready for loading and shipment. Number 6, minimal damage to adjacent structures. Number 7, sounds of explosions heard and seen by witnesses. And number 8, enormous clouds of pulverized concrete and heat. Squibs, explosive charges visible at the upper floors, these isolated explosions. And number 10, of course, chemical evidence left behind in the residue. If you have all these features, you know you have direct evidence of explosive destruction. Fire can create any one of these, let alone all 10 of them. We don't believe. So if you have these features, you know you have a controlled demolition, especially if you have government documentation. That can be very helpful, experts agreeing it's a controlled demolition. At least those experts who are objective in their assessment, who don't earn substantial quantities of their income from the federal government and might have a conflict of interest in being objective. Foreknowledge of the destruction. These are planned months in advance, of course, so people know about controlled demolitions. With video documentation, this is all proof of controlled demolition. So with that in mind, we're going to apply these features to the destruction of Building 7 to see if it has any of them. Is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure, for instance? Well, let's listen to Dan Rather and watch once again, from this view of the destruction of this third tower.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
So that's pretty interesting. Coming from Dan Rather, is using his intuition. Looks like a dynamite when they use the bring building down, like the old hotels in Las Vegas. We've all seen them. It's kind of iconic. They're fascinating to watch. It looks exactly like that. So why wouldn't NIST have seriously considered the use of explosives here? They might have their own agenda. We don't speculate on that, but let's see what else we have. Feature number 2. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Take a look from this side, West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. In fact, it looks like exactly like the old hotels. Look at the penthouse, which drops a half a second prior to the perimeter structure, indicating complete core column damage under that screen wall and main penthouse, which pulls the rug out from NIST's initiation of collapse theory, which says it starts on the left side of this building on the east, because that earlier penthouse collapsed 6 seconds earlier. And then they say that lateral instability traveled across from east to west, left to right, across this building. But obviously, it's collapsing simultaneously from the core, the elevator core, where the columns are positioned all around. They must have all been weakened or removed at once. Well, and then clearly it falls into its own footprint. It's not falling over. The center of the pile is in the center of the building, the center of the building's footprint. Well, I'm not quite convinced yet. Let's put these buildings side by side and see if there's any similarity. Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition on the right, building 7 on the left? Wouldn't you expect that NIST would actually focus in, if not exclusively, primarily on the use of explosives instead of fire, which has never brought down a skyscraper prior to 9/11? Well, we have, how do we bring a building straight down into its own footprint? We have to remove those column supports, all 80 of them, at once, on each floor, synchronistically timed, floor by floor, taking out at least 8 floors. I'll show you why in a second. But does fire have this level of precision, especially those fires that you saw burning here and there, small, few, scattered fires? How fast is the building falling? Let's listen to David Chandler, physics teacher.
Just by watching it, anybody can see that building 7 fell close to free fall. To measure it, I used software to track the corner of the building and compute a graph of downward velocity as a function of time. The graph had a long, straight section indicating constant acceleration. Measuring the slope, I found the acceleration to be within 1% of the acceleration of gravity for the first 2.5 seconds. In other words, the building fell through its own structure with 0 resistance.
Well, how fast does that happen? You can see it's gaining downward momentum every second. It fits the free fall curve exactly. How can a building fall with 0 resistance? All of the resistance, the 40,000 tons of structural steel, must have been cut or removed. That's the only way. It's as if 8 stories of this building were all of a sudden removed, because that's the period of distance, 100 feet, over which this building fell. In a third of its 7-second fall, 2¼ seconds, at free fall. NIST actually admits this in their final report after being publicly embarrassed by members of AE911Truth into acknowledging that they were denying the obvious, measurable free fall of this building. But they come and put it in their report, but only suggest that this is consistent with their earlier analysis, which of course it is not. Do we have the total dismemberment of the steel structure? Yep, it falls like a house of cards, indicating complete dismemberment of the steel frame. Another verifiable, consistent fact supporting the other facts in the case. Buildings that fall due to natural causes do not break up into their individual structural components. Their concrete is not pulverized to fine powder. And there's generally not minimal damage to adjacent structures. And in this case, minimal damage because the center of the building is centered in the pile. We have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions? Here's Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic. He's on site helping people.
2-3 seconds, you heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
And this gentleman.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
And this gentleman who worked on the 23rd floor, along with Mayor Giuliani, who together I guess they were outside the building, but didn't know it had been evacuated after the planes hit the towers. Then they wandered back into the building, got up to the 8th floor, and experienced this.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs, we made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, the police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Bombs are not a part of the official story of 9/11, except for the explosions in the airplanes, of course. But listen to this explosion on the afternoon of 9/11. Should it have been investigated?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
But they're not a part of the story whatsoever. The final reports have no examples of explosions. You'll hear more. Do we have enormous pyroclastic-like clouds of pulverized concrete? Yes. Traveling at about 35 miles an hour in every direction away from this collapse are these expanding cauliflower-shaped plumes rapidly expanding due to the incredible heat. Well, what's that heat source? Not those few small scattered fires that we saw earlier. There's some other heat source here, incredible heat source that we'll be looking at. Certainly not these few fires. Let's look at it now as we look at feature number 9, incredible heat. Beams were partly evaporated, according to Jonathan Barnett, the FEMA report author, or one of them. Steel members in the debris pile that appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures, which he can't explain. But here's the steel, this piece from World Trade Center 7, documented by Abolhassan Astani Azal, a structural engineer given unlimited access to the landfill where all this steel was taken before it was shipped somewhere else. Do we have direct evidence of explosive destruction in these 10 key characteristic features and uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition as well? Can fire create any one of these 10? Well, we don't believe that they can, not even in World Trade Center 5, which is fully engulfed in fire. If any of these buildings were expected to come down due to fire, we might expect it to be this one. Did it? No, not even mid-rise or high-rise. Fireproof steel frame buildings do not collapse due to fire. But on 9/11, these few small scattered fires brought this building down in 6.5 seconds. And those looking to answer the question, what happened here, show the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene as 400 truckloads a day were carted away from World Trade Center site, starting with Building 7. The largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. And yet the forensic investigators could not get their hands on it, citing Bill Manning, of editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, crucial evidence that can answer many questions on the slow boat to China, as they were sent to China for recycling, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. Well, what about foreknowledge? Look at these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion over their shoulder, looking back at the building, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. This building is about to blow up. Moving back. All right, guys. Sorry. We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up. Hopefully, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. How do they know? How do they know the building is about to blow up? A few small scattered fires are going to blow the building up. Well, we believe we may have shown by now for you the key characteristic features of controlled demolition, all 10 of them. And that's why we have so many architects and engineers calling for a new investigation. And we want you, of course, to join us as you look at the rest of the information, particularly relative to the Twin Towers, and which, you know, is even more obvious once we look at the information that most people haven't been given. Not even architects and engineers are aware of the massive explosive evidence and the evidence of incredible heat unexplainable by jet fuel. We'll come to that. North Tower was hit in the morning at 8:46, collapses about an hour and a half later. So we have some people associate the impact of the jet planes to bringing the towers down, but no, most of that jet fuel was burned up in the first, outside the building, actually, initially, right away, 90% of it, according to NIST. And then the rest of it was burned up in just 10 minutes. So we have normal office fires for an hour to an hour and a half in these buildings. And the South Tower hit 30 floors down. And it actually is the first one to fail after an hour, burning an hour in that case. So that's basically what we have. The theory is that these raging fires cause these floor trusses supporting these concrete slabs, which sagged and then pulled in these perimeter columns, causing them to buckle. Well, we don't have enough fire in these buildings, particularly as they were going out at the point of the collapse of these buildings, indicated by the thick black smoke, their oxygen-starved and cooler fires. So we don't have the fires necessary to cause these floors to fail. But NIST, of course, suggests that the jet plane impacts knocked off the fireproofing, making these thinner trusses more vulnerable. We'll come back to that. First, do we have a sudden onset of destruction? And is it at the base of the building, like building 7? No, at the point of jet plane impacts. And do we have witnesses that hear the explosions associated with the initiation of the collapse, see flashes of light? Well, curiously, we have 500 first responders orally recorded on tape, and 118 of them, now 156, according to the author Graham McQueen, who documented this, observing flashes, sounds of explosions, another phenomena clearly indicative of explosive demolition. An explosion appeared on the very top. Simultaneously, from all four sides, material shot out horizontally. Then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. An explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. They blow up these buildings. Seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. Well, let's take a look. On the right, we have the North Tower, indicated with the antenna. On the left, a known controlled demolition. Now, just looking at it, ask yourself as we slow it down half speed, is there any similarity? Sudden onset, fairly symmetrical descent, acceleration. Yeah, is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since, at least in the first 4 seconds here, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition on the left. But NIST opts straight for the theory of destruction by fire, mostly fire, jet plane impacts, also, and ignoring the evidence of explosions, which you're going to see lots of. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. Initially, just one flash. This flash just kept popping all the way around the building, and the building had started to explode. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. I saw low-level flashes. I saw a flash, 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 and then it looked like the tower came down. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. We actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building. With each popping sound, initially an orange and then a red flash came out of the building. Then it would just go all the way around the building on both sides. Well, let's look at the South Tower on the right, compare it to a known controlled demolition on the left. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? 2,800 architects and engineers think so. Sudden onset. Near free fall acceleration. Smooth descent. No jolt. You have to take out the structure to achieve this. I saw a flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. So the order of these witnesses are all the same. They saw the flash or they heard the explosion, and then the building's coming down, indicating that the flash or the explosion is causative of the building coming down, not the building coming down causing this other phenomena. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive.
It was as if they had detonated. Yeah, detonated. Yeah. Take down a building. Boom, 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 boom. All the way down.
Very revealing testimony from professionals. Take a look at the North Tower. it begins a sudden descent. And in 4 seconds, that section is fully telescoped on itself almost. In other words, the top section is destroyed just about. Well, the physics tells us that if you drop one body on top of another, they're going to have an equal and opposite force. And the top body can't destroy the rest of the building below it, which is Nist's theory, drawn from Zdeněk Bazant, who came out with this theory 2 days after 9/11 in a detailed high math calculation set, attempting to show that the lightest part of a structure can destroy the heavier, cold, hard, intact steel below and then destroy itself. That can't happen. So what you see here is actually it's destroying itself. Take a look here, a little easier to see. There's no movement from that bottom red line down before 4 seconds. And yes, we'll come back to the squibs underneath that red line, or these isolated explosive ejections. Take a look, though, as we start and stop. Like the first responders said, like a belt, all these explosions wrapping all the way around the building. Nowhere do we, in fact, see an upper portion of this building driving the rest of the building down. None of the photos, none of the videos. What we see instead looks more like a volcanic eruption on the right, as the Tongan Sea in 2009, with upward, outward arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections, trailing thick white smoke clouds. How about the South Tower? Begins to fall off of itself. So it's falling at 22 degrees. So we have asymmetrical loading from this section of building, 30 stories, falling off of itself. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires and asymmetrical damage from the airplane impacts. But look from below. We have complete symmetrical destruction, like the fireman described, all the way around the building, like these belts. And zooming in on one of those, it makes no sense. Are we looking at a collapse or the leading edge of an explosion traveling at near free fall acceleration straight down through the path of greatest resistance, the cold, hard, intact steel below? Number 3, do we have squibs or isolated explosive ejections? Well, sure. We have them here and here. And thanks to Loose Change, who Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis, etc., those guys, Corey, we have some great documentation here of isolated explosive ejections, which NIST says, well, these are puffs of air being produced when that top section drove the rest of the building down. Well, we saw that top section was destroyed in the first 4 seconds. This is the latter 8 seconds. There's no more piston or pile driver. And if this was, and this isn't air, these are pulverized building solids, and they're coming out at 160 to 200 feet per second, way faster, because they're clocked by physicists, in fact, way faster than puffs of air. And in the open office planning of these buildings, we would expect that if this air was driven down the elevator hoistway and came out on these floors here, it would, because all these floors are open architecture, open tenant improvements. That's the whole point, to have an open space in here created by this new innovation in structural engineering. So you'd expect that air to fill that space, and if it broke any of these windows, it would break all of them in this massive pressure. Not these highly focalized, pinpoint, accurate, violent ejections occurring 20, 40, and even 60 stories below. How fast is the building coming down? Let's listen let's take a look. We'll count here. Here's 7 seconds, 10 seconds. In under a dozen seconds, the building has completely collapsed. How can we explain this? Let's listen to David Chandler. What David Chandler documents is the free fall, near free fall acceleration. It's going almost as fast as the bowling ball falling out of the sky. It's accelerating, getting faster and faster, straight down through the path of what should have been the greatest resistance, the thousands of tons, 100,000 in each of these buildings, of structural steel framing designed to keep this building from going anywhere, much less completely giving up the ghost here. This is the steel we're talking about. All this steel has to be crushed, so the building collapse would have to slow down at least, even if it could get initially started. There's more steel here than glass. Is the building totally dismembered? Yeah, it's just about totally dismembered. The steel is not stacked up in a nice pile at the bottom. It's distributed well outside the perimeter of each of the twin towers, broken up into its 37.5-foot lengths, ready for loading and shipment. Is there lateral ejection of this steel? And how would that happen? Take a look. Here's freely flying structural steel sections, laterally distributed. Look at this one. Back 2, 3, forward 2, 3, back 2, forward 2, back 2, forward 2. That's 45 degrees. That starts out laterally. What is the lateral force that can send a 4-ton structural steel section laterally, landing 300 to 600 feet in every direction away from this building? It's enough force to send a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. That's a lot of force. Where is it coming from? Well, it appears to have been responsible also for these missing floors, 110 4-inch thick and 8-inch thick concrete floors, which in a real gravitational collapse, like in Mexico on the right, we'd expect to be stacked up, 110 of them. We don't find 50. We don't find 10. We don't find 1. These are an acre in size, this building. We find a 2-story, 3-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns, etc. And the rest of it is distributed where? Well, we have enormous pyroclastic-like clouds somewhere. This concrete has gone somewhere. It's not stacked up at the bottom. It's pulverized in midair. 90,000 tons of concrete. Pulverized in all of these explosions heard by the first responders you just heard, into 100-micron particles, spread like a massive blanket across lower Manhattan in a 4-inch thick blanket. 30% of this dust is pulverized concrete, like an ash, that fine. How does that happen? And what else is found in that blanket of World Trade Center powder? And what's found at the bottom of the pile, dripping from the molten steel, says this Bronx firefighter. Saw pools of literally molten steel at the World Trade Center, says the president of the cleanup company. Molten steel at the heart of the tower's remains. And these firefighters.
Molten steel. Molten steel running down the channel goes. Like you're in a foundry. Yeah. Like lava from a volcano.
Like lava from a volcano, streams of molten metal that leaked from the hot cores and flowed down. Metal dripping from a beam. A little river of steel flowing, says Leslie Robertson, the World Trade Center structural engineer himself, documenting what he doesn't understand to be evidence of something else beside normal office fires or jet fuel. Here it is, dripping out of the claws of this excavator, liquid molten metal falling. Turns out to be molten iron, as tests show. But NIST says, oh no, this must be melted airplane. Well, melted aluminum doesn't glow bright yellow, white hot, or even orange in daylight conditions, as you see here. 10 minutes prior to the collapse, from the point of the collapse, well, FEMA documents this molten material attack on the steel in World Trade Center 7 in their Appendix C to this building performance assessment report that came out in May of 2002. Thinned to almost razor sharpness, a 1-inch column reduced to 1/2-inch thickness and then curled to razor sharpness. How does this happen? They have no idea. They don't even begin to speculate. Well, they do. Because with the rapid oxidation and sulfidation, they suggest, well, the sulfur must have come from calcium sulfate, which is what gypsum board is made out of. But gypsum board has never turned around and attacked the steel that it, for 100 years, has been designed to protect. A liquid iron eutectic mixture. Liquid iron is molten iron. We're talking 2,800 degrees with molten iron and hot sulfur attack on the steel. No rational explanation for the sulfur, documented by New York Times as perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, this presence of sulfur. Well, we know by the color that the temperature exceeded 2,000 degrees. We know that jet fuel doesn't burn that hot. We know that desks and chairs and paper don't burn that hot. Maybe 1,200 degrees at the hottest, according to one supporter of the official story, Thomas Iger. But steel had definitely melted. Where did it come from? What caused it to melt? Let's look at possible evidence of thermite cutter charges. Could it have produced that molten metal? What is thermite anyway?
Used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Maybe we're getting somewhere here. If thermate were used, we have a possible explanation for the extreme heat, 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a possible explanation for the elemental iron, which is the byproduct, molten iron, of thermite. We have a possible explanation for the sulfur, which is added to thermite to become thermate. So do we have evidence, more evidence, of the use of thermate? Well, what else was found in this fine powder, so ubiquitous by the U.S. Geological Survey in their toxicological studies of the dust? Molten iron microspheres, small, the diameter of a human hair on average, almost naked to the human eye. What are these? How are these explained? There's billions of them. In fact, R.J. Lee, an environmental consultant, also finds and documents these curious spherical iron particles. There's in the dust up to 6% of many of these samples are composed of these spheres. Unexplained, previously molten iron microspheres. more than 10 times the amount of iron particles found in dust, as you see on the left. No, they don't have a rational explanation here, but they do document that it is formed during the World Trade Center event. Not before, not after. Here's how thermite works, an experiment. So slowing that down to halfway, we have thousands, just in this small amount, of molten iron microspheres, which cool and fall. This is spherical. Why do they fall spherically? Just like raindrops are spheres, because the surface tension forms an aerosolized liquid into spheres. That's just what it does. And then they cool and fall with all of the dust. What else was found in the World Trade Center dust? If that's the evidence of ignited thermite or thermate, was there any evidence of unignited thermite? Well, that was found, interestingly enough, in 7 samples, 4 of them documented, 1 of them in this apartment across the street from the South Tower in Jeanette McKinley's apartment, who saved this dust and sent it to this team of scientists led by Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones. 4 samples, all finding the same curious red-gray chips. They thought it was paint. Looks like paint. It's dual layered, but they come up to a magnet. They're attracted by a magnet, so it's got iron in it. They get real curious, and they zoom in and analyze the red layer of these. That largest piece is about a 1/16 of an inch long. So these are small particles, hardly noticeable. So what do they find? They find the ingredients of unignited thermite: iron, silica, aluminum, oxygen, carbon. What is the ingredients of thermite doing in all the World Trade Center dust? This is not supposed to happen. They get real curious, zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope. What do we find? Iron oxide crystals, aluminum platelets, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. So here is the actual particles of thermite embedded in this matrix of an organic matrix of oxygen, silica, carbon. TNT explosives use organic material as the expansion, rapid expansion, give the concussive force from explosives. So here you have an incendiary, which works by means of heat, combined with the organic material, which can make the incendiary more explosive. Well, the published data shows that when you get these materials up to 420 degrees centigrade, maybe 800 or 900 Fahrenheit, they ignite, producing what? Temperatures far greater than the heater, the differential scanning calorimeter, provided, and releasing molten iron. Well, this is exactly what happened with the test studies, each of them. They release what? Molten iron droplets. These have the same signature as those molten iron spheres found in the World Trade Center dust, indicating that this is where those spheres came from. Well, as if we didn't know, they're found actually attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, and as you see here and here. So this is a self-corroborating, internally consistent set of experimental, reproducible data that could put a lot of people away for a long time if this material, this evidence can be brought into an uncorrupted judicial system venue. And so that's why we have it available. We don't have the authority as architects, engineers, and citizens to have our own investigation where we can force witnesses to come forth in we can't offer them immunity to come forth and provide their testimony under oath. So we need real we need a real investigation with a body that has that authority. We need journalists to do their work in order to bring it about. You see, this material is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is a very, very sophisticated process made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So let's get an investigation that looks at who makes this material, such as the individuals at NIST, or who were brought in by NIST to run this investigation, including SAIC, a head defense contractor, whose one of whose officers is Foreman Williams, for instance, who is an expert in nanothermite. So it appears as if the wolves have been put in charge of the sheep. So we've got to figure out a way to get an objective investigation here. We've done this in a peer-reviewed paper, the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, and this was done in 2006 or 7 or 8, and it has not been contested. No one has put forth their own peer-reviewed paper challenging the results of this detailed study. Not been done. So we consider all of this direct evidence of explosive destruction. We don't believe fire can create any one of these characteristics, let alone all of them, especially these fires, which are cooler and oxygen-starved at the time of the collapse of these buildings. We believe we've shown the 10 key characteristic features with the Twin Towers and uncharacteristic features as well, direct evidence of explosive destruction, and that this is proof of controlled demolition, and not so controlled given the massive explosive nature of the Twin Towers versus the implosion, the classic implosion of Building 7, all of which encouraged more than 2,800 architects and engineers to call for a new investigation. You can join them, whether you're an architect or engineer or not, and certainly sign our petition and take some action. We encourage you to sign the petition, become a member of AE911Truth. We have about 2,000 members who support us. We do need to double that number in order to be much more effective. So please become a member of AE911Truth. Donate as well to our cause and get us to the AIA conventions that we need to get to. Help us put out the expensive press releases around the country every time we have a new event, such as our report on the Plasco fire, which in Iran is said to have brought down a high-rise in last month, and which has obvious evidence of tampering. You'll find that on our website, AE911Truth. Volunteer with AE911Truth. We have numerous positions for you in as many fields as you can imagine, particularly getting the word out, reaching out to radio and TV shows, etc. We've got to get into the public sphere. This is our website. You'll find more evidence, more frequently asked questions, videos, volunteer opportunities. Right from your own computer, you can write your elected reps, television, radio, newspaper, tell everyone you know, screen the DVDs, share our resources, become a supporter of our work at the conventions. This year we're going to Orlando. We're asking the American Institute of Architects in a resolution, because we have 50 AIA members among the about 80 among the 150 who are sponsoring a new resolution calling upon the AIA to call for a new investigation. We'll go there in April, at the end of April, and we'll have our resolution voted on by the top 400 architects in the country, who are representing 80,000 architects. And last year we got 3 times more many votes than the year before. We're hoping to get 3 times that many yet again. We've also engaged one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Leroy Hulsey from the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, to conduct a 2-year, $300,000 study to show how this building could have come down, since he has already determined in the first year that it could not have come down, according to NIST, by office fires. So he's continuing his work, and in a few months, we will have a peer-reviewed study which we will take throughout the academic world. That project needs your support more than anything. So please go to WTC7evaluation.org and support the project with your financial and constructive feedback as well. Do look at our 50-page booklet, Beyond Misinformation, which delves deeply into the weak underpinnings of the NIST reports for all three of these towers. And if you know any architects or engineers, they can get credit for this course that you just heard today, as well as watching these DVDs and this Beyond Misinformation booklet. This DVD in particular, I want to show you a brief 2-minute trailer where we've assembled 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence for the destruction of these towers by explosives and incendiaries.
I don't want to be involved in conspiracy theories. I you know, there are lots of them that can go on. We can speculate forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. A report issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten.
What I saw was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the documents from FEMA, Appendix C, that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, we have found this modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-gray crystals are very high temperature incendiaries.
We have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime.
evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
Indeed, you can organize a screening. You can see this on, in fact, on free on YouTube, the hour version of this incredible DVD, and do check it out, share it with others. The 2-hour presentation by myself is on 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, is also on the one. You'll find it on YouTube as well. And there's a 15-minute DVD with Ed Asner narrating a very effective summary of the evidence of World Trade Center Building 7. So you should be aware also that this is our continuing education page, where we have 6 courses now that architects can take for credit through the American Institute of Architects, which is pretty awesome, I think. And so what is the truth that we have brought here? Well, it's the evidence, and I'll ask you right now, if you want to come off mute, Mike in Staten Island, Staten Island 911Truth has 20 members standing by to ask questions, which we're going to take right now. But I just want to acknowledge up front that we have a very disturbing reality brought about by the implications of the controlled demolition of these 3 towers. I mean, this is very unlikely due to Al-Qaeda. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, I'm not the best friend of or any friend of Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden or anybody else. That certainly that might have been involved, but they probably didn't have the wherewithal to fool the security company that had the security contracts for these 3 towers. We want an investigation of the security company themselves. This appears to be some sort of an inside operation. We don't know that. We just want a real investigation that exposes all of this evidence that we have brought to bear here for you. And when we show this evidence to architects, 90% of them raise their hands and say, yeah, we need a real investigation. And that's why we have so many. We just have a hard time getting to them. That's why we need your support, getting to them. This takes funds, it takes efforts, it takes your volunteer effort. So yes, the truth about 9/11 is disturbing, inconvenient, turns your world upside down, turned my world upside down 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. I was very uncomfortable with the thought that our government or the media could be lying to us on such a huge scale, magnanimous, incredible scale. So it just seems preposterous, which is why people don't want to look at this evidence in the first place. It changes our own internal psychology. We all of a sudden have to think very differently about our place in the world, the secure place we thought our government is providing for us, and we don't know who in our government may have been responsible. We certainly know that highly placed individuals in industry and government had to have been in place. After all, it's not just the towers we're talking about. There's questions raised by 9/11 researchers relative to the activity at the Pentagon, which we'll talk about, the activity at Shanksville, which we can talk about, the other activities surrounding the hijackers and these planes, and the lack of response from the military to these hijackings. Some of you may have much greater expertise on these areas outside the scope of AE911Truth. We can talk about all of it, though. So looking forward now to sharing with you, hearing from you what your thoughts and concerns are. I'm Richard Gage, AIA, founder of Architects and Engineers for 911Truth. And let's talk about this. Go ahead, Mike. Thank you. Thank you.
So, does somebody have a question that they want to ask? Okay, I'll bring the mic over to you.
Imagine it would be a question. Richard, can you hear us when we talk through the mic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sound great.
How are you? Could you tell us what went wrong with the high-rise safety initiative that was established here in New York City to have the buildings department look into Building 7? Why did that fail, in your opinion?
80,000 New Yorkers signed a petition calling upon the city of New York to investigate buildings that collapsed due to fires. That, of course, would include Building 7. The City Council found a technical reason to deny that effort and violate the will of its citizens. And the supporters of the initiators of that ballot initiative realized that it was going to take $100,000 to fight that, and so they couldn't afford to do it.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, Mike, could you take the camera and show everybody who's live, who's all in the audience? Give a wave around the room.
Video cable in the back, just make sure it doesn't pull out.
Hello, all you guys.
Yes,
I don't know if the screen is tilted down enough for them to see you low. Yeah.
Sorry about the crackling on the audio, everybody. I don't know where that's coming from. I have not had that problem before on any of our 50 webinars that we've given now. So we'll try to figure that out later. Any more questions?
Well, yeah, question. Are you saying that Building 7 was part of the conspiracy as Tower 1 and 2?
Was Building 7 part of the conspiracy of Tower 1 and 2? Well, they all happened on the same day. We've shown that Building 7 came down by explosive controlled demolition. We've also shown that, which is, of course, in violation of the official story. We've also shown that the World Trade Center 1 and 2 came down by explosive and incendiary destruction. So it seems inevitable to suggest, or imply, and even conclude that they are all part of the same operation. I don't see how any other conclusion can be.
I was down there when something came down, and it was.
Please get near the microphone. Get right next to the microphone.
I have it in my mouth. Okay, I was down there when 7 came down. It was standing for hours. If it was part of a plan, why did the planners make that building remain standing? What was the purpose of not taking it down with 1 and 2?
Well, first of all, we don't know what the agenda of the perpetrators was with regard to Building 7. What we do know is that the BBC announced the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it happened. And we didn't get to that today. We also know that CNN announced the collapse of this building at 11:07. And they said 15 minutes earlier, a firefighter came by and said a 50-story building collapsed. Well, there was no other 50-story building that collapsed. There was no other building that collapsed on 9/11. The 2 towers came down. Some buildings were damaged, but no building collapsed. Nothing near a 50-story building except Building 7, which collapsed 7 hours later. So some suggest that this story was put out too early by CNN and the BBC and others, and that it was intended to be brought down under the cloak of the massive dust cloud produced when the Twin Towers came down, but that it was a dud. So this is a speculation by 9/11 researchers who acknowledge it as such, but given the evidence that we saw of these construction workers walking away from Building 7 in the afternoon, having apparently been in there to fix something, who knows why are construction workers, I mean not firefighters, not rescue workers, not building occupants, but construction workers. They look like that, dressed like that. And they're saying, watch that building, it's going to come down, flame and debris coming down, the building's going to blow up. So they clearly have that knowledge. So this suggests that we might have an intentional act here, that we do have an intentional act that was probably intended to occur earlier. In which case we wouldn't have 11 different videos of all the angles of Building 7's collapse.
It was coming down, and we were told, obviously, I would say no one was within, I'm not going to say half a mile, but at least a quarter mile of that building, of the hours, and then finally it came down. But I don't know of anyone that was walking near that building.
So what's the question?
There was no question. No question there, but we have another questioner coming up.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi, Rich Florentino. I was at your conference at Cooper Union this summer.
Ah, yes.
Very enlightening. I still have my 9/11 Truth button. And one of the, not that the data wasn't completely compelling and convincing, but one of who I found as interesting as anything was Danny Sheehan, the lawyer, who said even with the data, you have to go some to find the right venue to get this tried fairly. I wonder if any progress has been made on that.
Yes, and it's very slow, and all of us are hopeful that the progress can be speeded up. We have a video coming out of it'll be an hour and a half to 2 hours, which is a condensed version of that 16 hours of incredible testimony and speeches given and analysis by a dozen attorneys, including Danny Sheehan, who's famous for the Iran-Contra affair, the Pentagon Papers. He will be guiding an effort to examine the best possibilities for lawsuits using the technical evidence that we presented to you today. I encourage everyone to visit the website, though, justiceinfocus.org, and take a look at this testimony, particularly by Danny Sheehan himself, which provides some incredible advice for those of us in the 9/11 Truth movement who want to get this evidence into a court of law.
Okay, we have another question here.
Hi, Mr. Gage. Thank you very much for imparting your time and wisdom on us. Also, thank you to Mike and Everything Goes Book Cafe. I have 3 questions, real quick. I want to keep it going. I know your time's short. One, your thought on Tehran's building collapse that just happened recently, a couple months ago. I know you touched on that briefly. 2.
Let's take one at a time, because I just turned recently 62, and I found that one question comes in and the other one pops right out. So the Plasco fire was in an iconic building in downtown Tehran a couple of months ago now, And they lost, I think, 11 firefighters in that fire. And the fire was on its way out. They had it under control when they witnessed, and you can see these explosions coming out of the windows in a synchronistic fashion. And we encourage you to go to YouTube and search Plasco fire, particularly, and put in demolition and put in AE911Truth. We have produced a detailed report on the evidence, not only for the explosives, but also the massive evidence for incendiaries, much as we showed you today relative to the pile beneath Building 7 and the Twin Towers. We have hot molten metal, which dripping out of the material held in the crab claw excavators. This is not explainable by normal office fires. They don't produce molten metal like this, but thermite does, as we saw today. So all of this evidence has been provided by email to each individual member of the commission established by the Iranian government. And we hope that they'll take a detailed look at the evidence and not just swallow the official story, as was done here in the United States at the World Trade Center, regarding the World Trade Center.
Question is, from what we learned here with everything today, so it's my understanding nanothermite was sprayed, incinerated, and then the debris was shipped to Staten Island and then China. So is China just sitting on the trump card of evidence that they just want to pull out on us? That's question two.
Well, presumably China and India, and I think some other countries which received this steel, has already used it. They got it at a very, very inexpensive price. I've forgotten the actual price, but it's well below market value. In order to get it, well, it was shipped so fast away from the landfill, the Fresh Kills landfill, which you're familiar with from being from Staten Island. So who knows? We do have, I don't know, dozens of sculptures around the United States and around the world that still show the evidence of incendiaries on the ends of these steel beams. Stephen Jones has actually analyzed some of it, and it clearly shows evidence of thermite residue, aluminum, molten iron, and the slag.
Yes, sir. When I was in Sherman Oaks, California, outside the fire station, they actually have the molten part showed as on display as a memorial to the firefighters that died during that event. So thank you for that. And just my last question real quick, if this is okay to ask, what happened with all the Imran files and everything that year?
Well, we're referring here to one of the tenants of the Securities and Exchange Commission in Building 7. There are some very interesting tenants, including the IRS, the CIA, the Department of Defense. The Securities and Exchange Commission is a very secure 2 floors. In fact, the 2 floors where the fires were worse. The 12th and 13th floor, perhaps by coincidence, perhaps not. The Securities and Exchange Commission lost thousands of files related to hundreds of cases, very high-profile cases like the one you mentioned, Enron, WorldCom, and others, which were irreparable, insufferable damage. Is that the right word? Incalculable damage to those cases. So we have a lot of questions, a lot of investigations that need to be made here, particularly arson in the case of Building 7.
Hello, my name is Richard. Hello, my name is Richard. I'm in support of the work you're doing, but I was wondering if anyone has done objective analysis of all the amount of methane coming from broken pipes from the damage of the planes, in consideration with the high LEL and HEL levels of methane, the explosive levels of methane, understanding that methane is heavier than air and naturally sink down in the fire into the bottom of the building. Would it take 102 minutes for the building to come down?
Yes.
Yeah, it was 100. So how much methane did escape through broken pipes from the two buildings in 102 minutes? Was that ever calculated by any governmental agency?
Well, I think you're referring to natural gas, and natural gas is not allowed in high rises. So this is a Class A building. We don't have natural gas in the Twin Towers.
Yes, no broken pipe gas mains.
There's no gas in the Twin Towers. There's certainly broken pipes, and for instance, the fire sprinklers were severed, according to the official story, by the jet plane impacts, which certainly compromised the effort to put out the fires. There were explosions in the basement prior to the planes that hit, according to many witnesses, including Willie Rodriguez, most famous among them, who, and it is speculated that such explosions in the basement had to do with the sabotaging of the fire sprinkler system so that they couldn't put out the fires. That's a speculation.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Cricket, and I just have a quick question. Do you have any idea, or has it been studied, how much thermite would it really require en masse to take all three of these buildings down? You said something about there being 80 columns, each floor would have to have a squib. So really, is there any estimate of what quantity of volume of thermite it would take to actually bring these down on purpose?
We have a clue in how much ignited and how much unignited material of thermite there is found in the World Trade Center dust. For instance, the iron microspheres, up to 6% of the dust samples are composed of this residue of ignited thermite. So this is estimated to be about 10 tons of the residue that's found of ignited thermite. So it would be much more than 10 tons because thermite creates not only molten iron, which is tons of which is found in these meteorites, they call them. They pulled up from the piles in Building 7 and the Twin Towers. Molten iron fused with concrete and other materials. But also, when thermite is ignited, it produces not only molten iron, but aluminum oxide gas. So the aluminum particles in thermite turn into gas. So that gas is all the white gas that you see off-gassing in the towers. So easily, it could be 50 tons of thermite just from the evidence that we have available to us. But I suppose one could count the structural steel connections and estimate or speculate how much thermite would be used to destroy each joint. There's been tests done by John Cole, civil engineer, in his backyard where he made his own thermite cutter charges and packed thermite in them and cut steel beams with them, which have the same effect of razor thinness and severe hot temperature corrosion attack on the steel that was found in the World Trade Center dust, World Trade Center steel. So we could find out how much he used and how many connections there were, but it would be clearly at least 3 dozen tons of this material.
Thanks, Richard. I actually have a question for you, Mike. There are two papers that support the official story that I'm aware of. The paper by Czech engineer Bazant, which explains the collapse of the Twin Towers by the top section, as I understand, crushing all that's below it. And then there's the study done by James Millett, who analyzed the dust also and said that he did not find thermite. Can you talk about those two papers and what are the problems with them, if any?
Well, 2 days after 9/11, Zdeněk Basant from Chicago Northwestern University put out a paper speculating, well, that the upper portion, 15 stories in the case of the North Tower, above the point of jet plane impacts, drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. So he has some pretty fancy mathematics to try to prove that. But that's been challenged in numerous papers put forth by several members of AE911Truth, including Tony Zamboti, Richard Johns, Jeffrey Zudolinsky, etc. Some of which have been published, others of which have been rejected by the American Society of Civil Engineers, Journal of Engineering Mechanics, for very unfounded reasons.
Yeah, they said it was outside the scope of the journal, didn't they?
Yeah, that's the wording, that it's outside the scope of the journal. Well, they directly contradicted with evidence the assumptions inside of the Bazant analysis. So it's how it could be outside the scope of the journal is unimaginable. So we certainly have approached the university with a conscience check on several occasions, papers produced for them. Regarding the other paper, Millett put forth, did a study and couldn't find the aluminum in the red grade chips. So his conclusion was that they must have been paint. Well, that study is severely flawed, among other reasons, in that he didn't heat up those chips like the famous study done by Niels Harrit, Stephen Jones, etc., in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. That 25-page peer-reviewed paper documented what happened when they heat each of those chips from different samples at 420 centigrade, 800 or 900 Fahrenheit, in which they ignited, producing much hotter temperatures, as well as molten iron spheres, which are documenting the energetic nature of those chips, meaning it's thermite and incendiary, and that's the proof. And he didn't do that. He heated it up to only like 400 degrees. I don't know why, but I would speculate that he didn't want to achieve those same results. So, and he never produced a peer-reviewed paper. So this is not a challenge to the peer-reviewed paper at all.
Question.
I'm Robert, and I was interested in maybe speculating a little bit about some of the people who may have been behind if it is actually a conspiracy that was psyched out. Somebody mentioned Danny Sheehan, and I believe it was him that I believe I heard Danny Sheehan on Guns of Butter a couple of times. May have been somebody else that I heard, but detailing many of the connections and the corporations and a lot of the people who might have been involved in making a very persuasive argument. And also the day before 9/11, when Don Rumsfeld in Congress, he was testifying in Congress about
I believe, $2.3 trillion that was missing from the Pentagon, and he didn't know anything about it. And then the next day we had 9/11, and that story was forgotten and never, as far as I know, never returned to it.
Let me share with you, yes, $2.3 trillion was missing from the Pentagon budget. And this was Donald Rumsfeld was being forced to deal with this problem. He actually announced it the day before 9/11. And people say, well, what happened to the Pentagon? Well, here's what we all agree on in the 9/11 Truth movement. That nothing should have hit the Pentagon. This is the most highly defended building in the world. And this is an hour and a half after the Twin Towers were attacked. So all of our fighters were sent north, south, and east away from the defense of the vulnerable corridor there we have on the East Coast in air drills with various names like Vigilant Guardian. So we have the Keystone Cops is really more like what our national defense looked like. But here's Hani Hanjour, who is said to be flying this jet plane. He failed Cessna flying school, but comes in and heads not straight down into Donald Rumsfeld's office from the vulnerable roof structure, but this plane is said, and the official tracking data shows that it's circling 270 degrees around the Pentagon, dropping 3,000 feet per minute in a maneuver more associated with an F-15 fighter than an airliner, giving it every opportunity to be shot down with the surface-to-air missiles that we know are guarding the Pentagon, but it wasn't. And where does it hit? It hits the reinforced area that is the vulnerable offices of naval intelligence and civilians working, auditing on an auditing project to find that $2.3 trillion, which Donald Rumsfeld had announced was missing from the Pentagon budget. So the civilians and the Naval Office of Naval Intelligence was targeted and killed. Whether it was by a plane or not is a subject in deep debate within the 9/11 Truth movement, or explosions. Certainly, those projects, those auditing projects, were compromised severely. So we all want an investigation into what did or didn't hit the Pentagon. We all want the release of the high-resolution cameras all around the Pentagon, which would show exactly what did or did not hit it, but we don't get that. Indicating that we have a cover-up at the Pentagon as well. And Shanksville.
I guess my question is really, how can we expect to get any truth from a system that's corrupt? Basically, how are we gonna wake up enough people to actually demand truth when all the mechanisms of culture are designed to shut down any protest and shut down any critical thinking skills, and just keep shopping and all will be fine? That's my question.
Yeah, that's an awfully good question. It's certainly one that I do not have expertise enough to answer, but I can tell you that having been at this 10 years now, and some of you have been at it 15 years or 16 years, it is an uphill road. There appears to be complete dominance of the media, justice system, legislative, and executive systems. So we have gone to the people and to the academicians, in our case, architects and engineers for 911Truth, and the professionals, forcing them to deal with reality by putting the evidence in their face. For instance, we've been to more than a dozen conferences with thousands and thousands and thousands of architects and engineers who stop by our booth, or we stop them and we say, well, look at this building going down, building 7. What do you think is doing that? What's causing that? Well, they all say controlled demolition. When we tell them that our government, in fact, the AIA, American Institute of Architects, says this is normal office fires, they go, no way. Office fires can't do that. I mean, it's pretty intuitive. A child gets this. This is 7th grade physics. And once they see that and they realize the problem, they end up supporting us in one way or another. Resolution, signing the petition. So that's why we feel our greatest opportunity is with the professionals and academicians, even though it is also quite slow because we can only reach so many of them. We only have enough money it costs $4,000 to set up a booth at the annual National Convention of the American Institute of Architects, which has 10 to 14,000 architects, in which we can talk to hundreds of them, but we see thousands of them. They see our booth and so forth. So we get a lot of great exposure that way. And when we achieve 50% of the vote, hopefully this year, but probably next year, given the accelerating positive results we're getting after, this will be our 3rd year, that we can force the AIA to actually call for an investigation which will turn the world upside down on its head. Along with the World Trade Center 7 study by the University of Alaska, the computerized dynamic analysis they're doing in its peer-reviewed study, this is huge. I mean, these are huge opportunities. If we can continue to support them financially through the peer-reviewed process, the videos and the press releases and public exposure that we need to have. So that's my best answer, but I'd like to hear from others in the audience there, what you guys think is necessary to achieve a breakthrough in this uphill struggle to awaken people of the United States to the disaster of 9/11. I mean, it all goes back to 9/11. We have wars all around the world, particularly in the Middle East now, a war on Islam that is a false flag operation. Many other false flag operations that have started since then, and of course before, to create a culture of war. And we've got to have, it all goes back to 9/11. And the clearest point of intersection is at the World Trade Center towers, where we can show so plainly, as you've seen today with the evidence, that if we can just get it out in greater measure, we will achieve the critical mass necessary to overturn awareness in the American people and people around the world. We've been to 40 countries around the world, 100 American cities. We've spoken to groups of 100 to 4,000. And we won't stop until we do achieve victory. But I don't know, the best way other than what I've mentioned to make that happen. But what do you guys think? I mean, let's hear some thoughts. This is a discussion. I'm not the expert on this subject, as you can tell. The subject of waking up the American people, certainly.
I really was happy to see that one of the scientists from NIST itself came out and said that when 9/11 happened, he heard the official story and then just didn't think about it anymore. And then 15 years later, his friend told him that there was controversy, and he looked into it and was shocked at what he saw. that was obviously a corrupt report. And I think things like that are very good, and I'm hoping that his coming out inspires other people to do that as well.
Yes, there's a video by Peter Ketchum, whom you're referring to. And if people go to YouTube and search NIST employee, NIST is NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, Peter Ketchum, Ketchum, you can see that video. It's getting a whole lot of attention because he speaks so humbly, so from the heart, as a 12-year employee of NIST, dumbfounded as to how such an obvious fraudulent report could have been put forth by a company that he had a great deal of faith in. And so he's calling upon his fellow employees to come forth, those who worked on this particular project. He had not, but and blow the whistle. And so that's what we're looking for. That'll help a lot.
Question, we have another question here.
Hi, Richard. My name is Gary, and I really want to thank you for sticking with this. And we are doing what needs to be done, I think, right now, and we will continue to do so, and you have been doing so. I don't know of anything special that we can do other than continuing to have meetings like this and share the videos and so forth. So we're doing, I think we are doing the work, and I think it's slowly growing, the awareness. I wanted to ask you, if you could just summarize for everyone where we are with regards to JASTA and success or lack of success, whatever we've gotten from JASTA, and where we're headed with regards to that. And then I will just finish by saying that if we were successful in reaching a real conclusion on these events on 9/11 that are highly suggested by this film and your work and all of our work, if we were to reach some kind of real conclusion that was in the direction that you and I and everyone here is inclined to think, we would need to be prepared for some real serious change and direction, redirection of the kind of life that we are going to actually live. So, if you could say something about JASTA and maybe your comments about, I'm working on what we need to do next. I would love it if this busted wide open on 9/11. I would just love it, but we have to know where we're headed, and maybe a thought or two about that.
Well, I don't have a crystal ball at all. I don't know where we're headed. I do know what we want. JASTA is a piece of legislation that allows family members of victims of 9/11 to sue foreign governments for active involvement in 9/11 if they can prove it. That was largely brought about by the release of the 28 pages, which some of you may or may not be aware of. You can Google 28 pages and JASTA, J-A-S-T-A. The 28 pages were illegally classified, and that's illegal because they don't have to do with national security, which is the only defense the government has to classify something, the only legal reason they have. What this document from the original congressional hearings before the 9/11 Commission found that the Saudis are deeply involved in 9/11. This is everybody who's read these 28 pages comes away with this conclusion, it seems. And so 500 family members, I think that's the right number, came together yesterday and filed a lawsuit against the Saudi government. And this is big news. And today, and they apparently, the Saudis, funded some of these hijackers and provided them and provided material support. Of course, the FBI is found to have been providing support as well. The CIA to the hijackers, putting them in schools, flight schools. This is all documented by others, including David Ray Griffin, who's written a book, New Pearl Harbor, 9/11 New Pearl Harbor, and 9/11 Commission Omissions and Distortions. You can learn a lot more about this. So the family members are pursuing this. Now, we don't believe in the 9/11 Truth movement that the Saudis got into the World Trade Center towers to set explosives and incendiaries, or were instrumental in sending our Air Force in every direction away from the Eastern Corridor in Vigilant Guardian air drills, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have some degree of concern that this is a red herring, that this is an effort perhaps to lead in the American people toward blaming Saudi Arabia, as opposed to the designers, the perpetrators the real perpetrators of 9/11. Myself, I'm hopeful that such a lawsuit would result in opening the whole ball of wax, a ball of yarn that would unspin, and that Pandora's box would be open, and that all could come out and be revealed. That would be in our best interest. So yes, I'm for this particular lawsuit for that reason, with that hope and with that caution.
Okay, another question here.
Richard, my name is Peter. One of the stories that came out about the World Trade Center 7 going down was that the mayor moved his Office of Emergency Management into that building, brought in loads of generators and a lot of fuel for the generators. And that was a story that came out why that building blew up. Do you have anything on that at all?
Yeah, this originally came from NIST itself, because there was diesel fuel and generators on the 5th floor of World Trade Center Building 7. And since there was no, they actually said that this was a cause of the fires, but they had to retract that when one member, Chris Arns in particular of AE911Truth, forced them into acknowledging through the photos and videos that there's no smoke coming out of the louvers on the 5th floor, the mechanical floor. And so they then retracted that. But Popular Mechanics, who picked this up, continues to show it as one of their proofs, if you will, of that the conspiracy theorists have it all wrong, that there were diesel fuel, massive diesel fuel, but NIST said none of this diesel fuel was burning, much less a causative factor, not even a factor at all, because the fires were normal office fires, and they were on the 12th floor, and that's where the initiation of collapse happened.
Okay, we have another question here.
I've been obviously thinking about this for a number of years. At the time these towers came down, I was told that people that were working on the weekends at the towers, for months, there were people working on the elevators on the weekends. And that for some reason, they had dogs normally that would be, I guess, bomb-sniffing dogs that couldn't be paid off, that were not on duty on those weekends. Do you know anything about that, or have I been given conspiratorial information?
Well, there are witnesses that show that the towers were, one half of one tower at least was shut down the weekend before 9/11. That bomb sniffing dogs were removed. There are witnesses about that. Since that is not direct evidence of explosive destruction, we have not included it. And there's not enough enough witnesses in our mind to present that. But the question remains, how could somebody or some group get access to the Twin Towers? So I'll share with you my thoughts about that. It turns out that there was the largest elevator modernization in history going on the 9 months prior to 9/11. Ace Elevator had this contract. So they had access to all of these elevators in the core of this building. They were locked up one at a time, at least, or several at a time. And they had complete access then to the core columns and beams in the building. So an Ace Elevator came out of nowhere to get this contract. This is a very small company who developed into 85 employees who were in the tower at the time of the airplane impacts. And they fled. This was documented in USA Today, who says that the 83-person elevator crew worked for Ace Elevator, a small company. I mean, and they secured this contract from Otis for unknown reasons. Otis Elevator is a huge company that had the maintenance up until this time. So I certainly want an investigation of Ace Elevator, who went out of business after 9/11, since this was their only large job. It was quite a scandal. These 83 employees left and didn't help the firefighters rescue the victims in this using the elevator cabs, the vehicle for getting these victims out of the elevators. So yes, here's another source of investigation. Hope that helps.
Okay, there's another question here about the gold.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, can you speak on the gold that may have been lost, and then the spike in the rise in gold, therefore after, for the next few years?
I have not researched the lost gold. We understand there was a gold heist robbery going on, trucks that were half filled with gold, drivers that went missing, gold that is, whether insured or not, was missing. Others know more about that than myself. It's certainly a part of the series of open questions associated with the destruction of the towers, as are the $1 trillion in bonds that were scheduled to come due after 9/11 that were apparently hosted in the towers or by companies in the towers, records of which were lost. So there's financial crimes that are quite severe associated with this. In fact, there's a great video that's been done by James Corbett and another gentleman, forget the name, but Follow the Money, 9/11 Follow the Money. James Corbett does a great job of running a lot of this down. So on YouTube, Follow the Money, you can search 9/11.
Right, here's another question.
Richard, I understood you to say that it would require around 50 tons of thermite to have done this job. Is that right? Did I understand you correctly?
No. What I said was it looks like from the evidence of residue of unignited and ignited thermite, because there's also 10 tons of red-gray chips by extrapolation based on the quantity that are found in the small samples, assuming that quantity is found in all of the samples, which is a safe assumption on average, that there must have been up to 50 tons of material that's to start with, to create 10 tons of unignited and about 10 tons of ignited residue. There must have been something like 50 tons to begin with, and maybe more.
I meant, well, I think that's what I meant, that it required 50 tons of thermite to be brought into the buildings. Are we talking about all three buildings, or we're just talking about the two buildings?
I think it's safe to say all three buildings, because who knows where all that dust came from. It's surrounding Lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area. The concrete is also pulverized in World Trade Center Building 7. So it could be that, and there's pools of molten iron under Building 7, and molten iron evidence evaporating the ends of the steel beams in Building 7. So yes, all three buildings.
Okay, so my real question is this seem difficult to get that amount of thermite into the buildings over time, or is this something that could somehow easily be done?
Well, I don't think it'd be easy, and it would be impossible without the cooperation of the security company, which is Securicom Stratosec, who had the security contract for these three buildings up until the day of 9/11, or including the day of 9/11, curiously enough, and whom we want a real investigation of. The 9/11 Commission did not even investigate the security company.
And I understand that George Bush's brother was the head of that company, the security company that was managing those three buildings.
Yeah, I think it was Marvin Bush who was on the board of directors of the security company.
Here's another question.
What are your thoughts on the Pennsylvania flight, the whole let's roll?
Well, we have a plane that went down in Pennsylvania. We have witnesses, according to others who have researched this. I have not. Dr. David Ray Griffin, again, is a great source on this. There are even more current sources. But apparently, the great body, the largest piece of the plane is found 8 miles away from where we were told that it went down in Shanksville. 8 miles away is where most of it went down. There are witnesses that heard explosions in the sky, that saw a jet fighter firing a missile. And there's no people, no luggage, no blood, no airplane parts in the hole. That was said to have been the hole that swallowed the airplane, but there was no evidence of an excavation of such airplane or the people in it. So the whole thing stinks of fraud, and we need a real investigation there as well. I don't have backup for those statements. I'm just telling you what other researchers have provided, what conclusions they've come to. Most people in the 9/11 Truth movement.
Okay, we have another question.
Okay. I would hope that all of you would join the March for Science. I think it's April 22nd. Structural engineers, civil engineers, architects, all y'all with the Truth About 9/11 group because we need to do that. But my question was, are there other classified documents concerning 9/11 that simply have not been declassified yet? That was my question.
Yes, and I'm not privy to what those are, but there's inevitably there must be hundreds of them. Does anybody else there know answer to this question? What some of the ones that people have been trying to get that they can't get? We certainly want NIST to release, according to the Freedom of Information Act, this is not classified information. We have a FOIA request that's been unanswered. And FEMA and NIST continue to point fingers at each other and not release the thousands of photographs that they claim to have, the hundreds of videos, the transcripts of interviews with witnesses, and the background information used to make their reports. We've filed for all of this, and we have to sue NIST, and we're involved in such a lawsuit right now to release this information. So we're getting some success on this front because they have no legal justification for withholding the release of this information. They can't use the same justification they did for the computer input data for Building 7, which was it might jeopardize public safety. They can't do that for everything. So we're on their tail about it, like a coyote on a greasy pork chop.
Well, I for one am really impressed with how consistent and dogged your pursuit of revelation has been. It's just amazing that you're keeping it up, and I'm very glad for it. Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. I'm just so glad you guys came out to see the evidence for yourself, and don't go away and not do anything about this. If your conscience is like mine, you'll have to follow up, find out, is this really true? Meaning either it is or it isn't true. If it is true, then you have to do something about it. As a citizen of the United States, you have to take the material that you found and tell others about it. They deserve to know, even though you might be afraid that they're going to call you something like conspiracy theorist or whatever. They still deserve to know. I didn't want to know about this when it came to my attention, but I was forced to listen by something inside that said, well, my God, what if this is true? I have to know. So now that you know, if you do, you are compelled, I hope, by your conscience to act. And I've given you some different ways to act. The best way is to talk to people, share the DVDs, the book, the YouTube videos, and this is the link to this video, which Mike will provide you. So please do something, something important, something big. And I'm glad to have been able to bring it to your attention. If you want to duplicate this live stream webinar in other places around the country, do that. I'm happy to do this anywhere, anytime to a group of this size. Thanks again, everybody. I'm going to have to go, so it's great to connect with all of you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Mike.
And we have